Well, I got to say, I moderated a few dozen of these, and every time I say, well, this panel needs no introduction, and for the first time in my life, I actually mean it. So no, I will dispense with the intros. Everybody knows everybody here. It's an honor to have you all. And we are going to talk about why to give. I mean, this is, it's kind of to tie in everything we've talked about today and bring it all together and just talk about the moral reasons, why people who've been very successful, should or should not give back. Is it an intellectual or an emotional decision when you give? How much? Let's talk about the balance of those two.
I think anytime you give, it has to be from your heart. You have to give something that you're passionate about. If not, you don't do it. And I think one of the amazing things about philanthropy is getting out, at least for us, getting out into the world and talking to people. And you realize how similar people are in terms of what they want and their needs. And they move you by the unbelievable things they're doing themselves to lift themselves up in these unbelievable circumstances, no matter where they are in the world. So for me, it's a heart tug that I feel and that I carry every time I come back home, be it Seattle or New York. But then it's your intellectual head that you have to put on when you're back home constantly, and even when you're out in the field talking to scientists and researchers, your intellectual head that says, okay, so I met that one person or that one family or that group of villagers, but how do I impact tens of millions? How do I use this money that's at our disposal to have the very biggest impact? And it's your brain that hopefully takes over when you're back home to help guide that emotion that you feel that keeps fueling while you give. At least that, for me, is how I would describe it.
David?
I can't top that, and I would agree with everything you've said. My theory is, number one, you should give money because when you give money, it's selfish. You will feel better about yourself. Nobody who gives away money says, I feel terrible about myself. I wish I hadn't given that money away. I hate myself for giving away that money. You feel better about yourself, and therefore, when you feel better about yourself, you're going to live longer because your emotional health will be better. Second, you might actually help somebody. You never know. When you try to do something, all the times you try to do something, it doesn't always work, but sometimes you might actually help people, and it's a natural human instinct to help other people. You can give it to your executor to give away, or you can give it away while you're alive. And at least my theory is it's much better to give it away while you're alive. How much can you give to your children before you completely spoil and ruin them? So I think when you give away money while you're alive, I think it's a good thing, and I don't think you should give it all to your children. I think letting an executor give it away, I think, is not a great thing. If you can give away as much money as you can while you're alive, I think you'll realize the benefits that I just mentioned before, and I also think you'll feel much better about yourself, and your children will feel much better about you if you care about that.
It's clear to us now there's sort of three different ways to give. One is to give money, write a check, which is important. Two is to give your time and really focus on the issue with passion. And three, essentially, is to give your reputation, leverage your network, and try to plug people together.
Now, Melinda, you and Bill are giving to, and dedicated to a lot of things that are very abstract and very far away from us. And how do you find, in terms of getting people excited about things that most of the people giving have no real understanding of?
Well, I think the best thing is to encourage people to get out and see the things. If you get somebody to go to Africa and see the beauty, and yet also get a glimpse of what happens to children, that malaria is this awful thing, not just in terms of deaths, but the number of kids who are permanently damaged, never able to learn because they've had either malnutrition or malaria, it really draws you in. And there's no substitute for actually going and seeing it. Same thing with schools. If you go to a inner city school and see some of the pathologies that can develop in terms of how it's protected and there's security and people aren't really going to the classes much, and then you go to a place a few blocks away that, say, is a charter school that's been run on a different basis, and you see that contrast, you really want all the kids to have what you see at the second place. And so I think you've got to have genuine experiences. That's kind of the retail end. And then you a little bit step back and say, okay, what is it about that system? Why isn't the combination of the market plus government able to solve that? Who's really studying how you reward teachers? Who's really studying why they're good? What is the institutional framework that would change that? that involves, working with experts, doing a lot of thinking.
Most of the people who got into the Forbes 400 got there by having an idea and pursuing that idea as long as they could, and it created great wealth typically for them. They didn't really care about making the money so much as pursuing the idea. I think in Bill's case, you were interested in proving that the software you could develop was the best software in the world, and things like that. And so the same principle really applies in philanthropy. You want to find something that you can really do that make the world a better place, and unless you have a passion for it, you're not going to really succeed. If you just want to make money, you're just probably not going to make money just because you want to make money. You've got to have a passion for doing something great in the business world that creates a new idea, a new service, and you push it forward. Same thing is true in philanthropy. You have to have an idea of something you want to do, and you put into it the same passion. And I want to agree with Steve. The ancient word for philanthropy that the Greeks invented had nothing to do with giving away money. It was philanthropy means love of humanity, love of people. And for the ancient Greeks, that meant giving your time, your energy, and your money. And I really wish we had a way of saying, here are the best philanthropists in the country, people who've given away not money, but their time, their energy, their ideas, because everybody doesn't have the ability to be in the Forbes 400 and give away large sums of money. It's great that people do so, but most people in the United States really only have the ability to give away their time and their energy and their ideas, some money, but not nearly the kind of money we're talking about represented here. So I really hope that the philanthropy movement, which 3 people on this stage have really helped develop, as a global phenomenon, is seen not just as wealthy people giving away money, but wealthy people giving away their time, their energy, and their ideas, and encouraging other people to give away whatever they can, ideas, energy, or their time.
When I was born in 1930 in the United States, the odds were 40-1 against me being born in the United States as opposed to someplace else. I was a male, the odds were even money on that. So now I'm down to 80-1, a shot. I mean, you don't want to bet on 80-1 shots normally, but I got lucky, and well, Bill says if I'd been born a few thousand years ago, I'd have been some animal's lunch, because I'd have gone on saying, well, I allocate capital, and the animals say they're the kind that taste the best, and I can't run fast and I can't climb trees, and so here I am by pure luck, born at the right time, the right gender, as it turned out, compared to my sisters who were just as smarter than I am. In the right place, and in a system where allocating capital pays off like crazy. And like I don't feel guilty about that. I do feel grateful about it. And I've got a whole bunch of stock certificates sitting in a box. They've been down there for 40 years. I haven't even looked at them for years. I could go down there and fondle them occasionally, but that's about all they're good for, to me. I mean, they have no utility to me. They have all kinds of utility to the people that Bill and Melinda are talking about. And so, I mean, it's incredible utility. And what can they do for me? They can't do anything as a practical matter. So it just seems so obvious that get them where they're useful.
Was there who can speak to a moment when kind of something clicked and you thought, this is something I should do, I should start giving on a massive scale? Any kind of epiphany moments?
I can't remember back that far. I'm sure I remember what we had for lunch.
I'll tell just one story, which is, Bill and I had already decided after we were engaged that the money that had come from Microsoft would go back to society. That was a given. We both came from families that believed in that and believed in volunteerism and civic work. But our first trip to Africa was after we were engaged, about a few months before we were to be married in the fall of 1993. And we went to see the animals in the safari. We had a group with us. We had an amazing trip. We didn't go to see the poverty. We weren't going because we thought, okay, we're going to have this foundation and this is what it's do. But you can't but help be in Africa and be on the ground and see the people and say, well, what's going on here? Why is it that we are in some of these countries? We were then in Zaire, which is now DRC. And why is it that, okay, places are shuttered, that there used to be a town here? Why is it that the women are the ones that we saw doing so much work? We didn't know even a quarter what we know about malaria back then. We didn't know anything about really the big childhood killer diseases, or really this lag in vaccines between when they get out in the United States or the UK and they go to a place like Africa. So it began this journey for us of learning as a couple that then got us on the path to say, well, where would we invest this money? How would we use it in a catalytic way that we think could have the most impact?
I would agree with almost all the points that have been made up here. I think it's a mixture, actually, and it is a journey between intellectual appeal and emotional. I mean, I grew up in a family where intellectually giving was part of being, human. If, it was the dichotomy, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And finding that right balance. And so I think one starts by writing checks, as Steve was saying, to a number of different things that might have an appeal to you. I think when you see other models out there, and clearly what the Gates Foundation represents today is a model for all of us to admire, but there are other models. There are models, whether it's the Broad Institute or what the Tisch family has done or what the Milken Institute has done, where you learn that you can make a difference. And it is empowering, and it is empowering to think that you can empower other human capital and unleash them in really productive ways. And I couldn't agree with you more. There is a spectrum. I think there's some that's totally intellectual, and that's good. All of this is good. But if you can have the emotional passion too, as you were saying, Melinda, that's even better.
But I think it's also worth pointing out, and some of the discussions today from many people in this room, I think really highlighted this, we're also giving, all of us, because we want to have an impact. We want to change the world. And how do you have the maximum impact? Ideally, with the most modest investment. That's what whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur starting a company, how do you take a little bit of resources and have the broadest possible impact? So looking for ways to get leverage and maximize the impact is not about the input of writing the check, it's about the output, what actually happens. We're all trying to change the world in our own ways. Everybody has their own things they particularly care about. But I think we shouldn't just focus on the beginning process, which is kind of the check writing. It's how do you have the impact? I think what we've all learned is it's hard. It takes a lot of work. But if all you do is write the check and then figure you're done, no, it's really kind of like investing in a company. A venture capitalist writes the check, but then the real value they provide is the expertise they help to guide that investment, the network that surrounds those entrepreneurs in terms of people they can bring into the organization. And I think trying to take those same lessons and apply them to this role, I think is very important.
I think a lot of people today have talked about they feel an obligation or they don't feel an obligation to give back, but there's also a question of, do you feel there's an obligation not just to give back, but to do it in a public way to show that those who've achieved incredible success give back to society? How much is it an individual internal obligation versus some external obligation?
Well, for us, it went back to what I said before. We weren't sure initially we wanted to do it. What we concluded was, after this lesson of trying different things, including just kind of more writing the check model, that how do you get the maximum leverage, the maximum network effect? And some of that is doing it publicly and trying to get other people to rally around your cause. That's what we were spending more and more time doing with the businesses we were trying to build and the nonprofits we were starting or trying to scale. So it made sense when we were approached that the idea of the Giving Pledge and making a public commitment we thought would motivate others potentially to make a public commitment. And not just, as David said, not just the wealthy, but even in our letter we put on the Giving Pledge site, we talked about democratizing philanthropy. A lot of the focus has been on building the platforms to make those small donations from lots of people have a significant impact. So it was to inspire other people, as well as to then create a network effect among the givers, so everybody was just a little bit smarter in what they were trying to do.
And where did the 50% number come from?
Warren should speak to that.
I said 0 and Bill said 100, so we compromised. It came out of the air. But I would bet that most of the people who have joined the Giving Pledge will not only give more than 50%, I think they'll give appreciably more than 50%, and they're doing it. You have to have a cutoff point at some place. But I don't think we've reduced anybody's expectations by using that number.
I want to just speak to the public versus private piece, because I think One of the things when you are giving money away is, for us, it would have been nice to just kind of be private, actually, about some of it. In fact, early on, we were doing a lot of things behind the scenes privately. And I don't know, maybe, Bill was already very visible because of the business. But for me, I liked to do it privately. I liked to fly under the radar screen. It was nice when we could go into countries and, the government didn't know we were there, so I could go see projects on the ground very anonymously. But what I've learned, again, and I've talked to many of, in particular, the spouses who have a little bit of uncomfortableness about this, should I be public about it? One of the things that we've learned, and I know Steve and Jean talk very eloquently about this, is that your voice in these things matter. And so if you're going to galvanize people around a particular issue that you care about, be it cancer, you've been affected by the Millikins, they've been affected by you. We've been affected by others who've given in the areas that we've given in and vice versa. But if you want to galvanize governments to give money around big causes or other philanthropists to come together around a cause that you care deeply about, you've got to be more public about it and you've got to use your voice. And one of the knock-on effects is that you do end up inspiring other people. And that is not necessarily your intent when you start out. Your intent is all about the impact and how are we going to make a difference in this cause. But you do affect others by what you do. And I think that's one of the things we've learned. And for me, it's one of the reasons I've been willing to be more public about our giving, even though it didn't come naturally to me from the get-go in any sense of the word.
It's a fundamental premise of the Giving Pledge that it is important for people to declare themselves. And we've actually had a few people that have talked about not writing a letter and can they just join. We don't want that because it's fine they want to give, but in the end, an important part of the Giving Pledge is the fact that a wide spectrum of people, ages, and all different interests, everything else, are explaining why to them it's important that they give half or more. And all 81 letters aren't going to hit a chord with a given reader, but a few will, and that's what counts.
I've had a chance, both in dinners around the United States and in China and India and other places, to be in a lot of discussions about philanthropy, and this topic come up a number of times. Perhaps the most interesting was when I was in the Middle East, actually in Jeddah, and there was a group in the room as wealthy on average as this group, and really struggling with it. But one of them mentioned that in the Quran it actually says the reason to talk about your philanthropy is if it encourages other people to do the same. And in that case, you have an obligation to talk about your philanthropy. And it's a tricky thing because are you trying to get credit for it, or are you rather just trying to be able to share what's worked and what's not worked? I think it's been fantastic where you can get groups together who can talk about what makes it fun, what makes it not be fun. Should you have staff? How do you involve colleagues and children and things? And here are the different ways people have solved that. And so I do think that being off by yourself, just doing it, it's fine. That's one option. But I don't think you'll learn quite as much or enjoy it quite as much if you can find a group of fellow travelers in terms of philanthropy in general, or people who are working on education or medical research or the environment or Africa. You're going to make a lot of the same mistakes if you're not somehow in an environment where people are being very open with each other.
This issue that Melinda brought up, and it was actually a big topic at this last Giving Pledge meeting, of how do you influence others beyond what you're doing, particularly governments. You could start with the premise of you could do what you're doing on your own. That's great. You could say, let's network that together with other givers and have more impact. That's great. You could then go another level and say, how do you interact with companies and create public-private partnerships that really integrate what you care about into what maybe hundreds of companies are doing on a global basis? That has even more impact. And then the final step is how do you integrate governments and leverage what they're doing or influence what they're doing, as Melinda said this morning. Do the risky things in this world, and then when you're looking to scale them, plug into governments. That gives you even more impact. Now, each of these is a little bit harder. In some ways, easier to stay here, a little harder to do this, harder still to do this, much harder to do this. But if you really want to have a big impact on these big issues, it requires stepping out of your comfort zone and trying to create that network effect.